Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Today, we have Francis Wade and Art Gilwicks with us, and with me, Augusto Pinaud. And Ray is somewhere in the world missing, hopefully having fun or sleeping according to the recording time we have. Today, we're going to be talking about creating your ideal workspace. It is important to understand what are the needs of your workplace, mostly, or the workspace, mostly because it will allow you to establish higher levels of productivity in that space, or if you are the lucky kind who can have it anywhere. So today we would like to split the show in three parts. The first part will be, where do we work best? The second part, what are the factors for that? And finally, the effects on having that ideal workspace and what you should, if you should have ownership on it or not. So how are you guys this morning?
I'm fine.
I'm doing well. It's a kind of drizzly day here right now, but I'm out and about and working where work needs to be done. So I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing pretty good. Enjoying a really nice day out of the window. So I'm working on the home office today and recording actually from the home office. Let's start this conversation. Where do you work best?
My first thought was that I work best in my office. And ideally, my office is a quiet spot, a quiet place, no interruptions. There's no phones and pings and knocks and no interruptions from the outside environment. But as I started to think about it some more, it's not for the work that requires the quiet that I need to get it done. Then my office is the best place. But what about when I'm giving a speech? I can't say that the best place to give a speech is in my office. It'd be kind of crazy to say that. So it's a tricky question, because I started to think that maybe it's not as simple as it seems. That in order for me to give my best speech, for example, it's not the case that I have to be in my office. It's the case that I have to be uninterrupted, and I can have an environment in which I can be focused. So I then pivoted away from it having anything to do with geography. And then I started to think, okay, it has something to do with being able to focus for a particular level of intensity for as long as the job takes. And that didn't seem to be bound by geography. It's more a function of the environment as I'm able to create it. So I think that it's not really geography for me. It's the environment as I can create it.
Yeah, I got to agree with you on that one, Francis. For me, a lot of my work takes me to client locations or various places, and being able to create a workspace wherever I am is critical for me to be able to be productive. So when I look at things such as, how am I going to work best? My headphones are probably one of the biggest contributors to that. To be able to plug into a sound source, put in my headphones, block out the outside sound, and drop into a flow state to be able to get work done. That's what makes or breaks it for me. Now, saying that, I did spend 4 years working directly from a home office, and that was, it was very nice to have that isolated environment. You knew you had dedicated focus for extended periods of time. But I don't think that decrees how productive someone will be. You really have to find a way that you can put your mind in the right operating state, regardless of the environment. Because if the environment is what's preventing you from being productive, you can either change the environment, which unfortunately is not an option for many people, or you can go through and you can just find a way to create your own little bubble. So that's what I do. I carry the gear that I need in my bag, and I can sit down and create a bubble somewhere and get work done.
It is interesting you put it that way. If I look back to my work experience, there has been up to this point, at least three really clear work styles. When I start, that it was really office bound, and it was trying to make that space productive and being able to get in the zone between that particular space. There is a second stage where I was what we will call a road warrior, and I was traveling 250,000 miles per year, where I was pretty much in that situation you're describing, where I needed to be productive anywhere. Didn't matter if it was an airplane, or a cramped airplane, or a hotel room, or looking at the ocean close to a client side. And then we can talk about the more recent stage and where I am, where I have now the flexibility to work anywhere. I can be here in my home office, I can actually be in the office, or I can be on a client side. And the problem is still the same. You still need to find a way to identify what kind of work you are going to do and how to get in the zone for that kind of work. In my particular case, it depends what I'm trying to accomplish and what is the work I'm going to do. It is not the same kind of rituals or things that I need, even that I carry them all with me, if what I'm going to do is conduct business or make sales calls or work with customers, than if what I'm going to do is been writing. So it changed what kind of environment I need. So for example, if I am going to do client work is something I like to do standing up. And I have a stand-up desk, and I even have a camera tripod that I trick with a table on top. So that way is the most portable thing I can take with me. And that will give me a stand-up desk almost anywhere. Why? If I am working with customers, I enjoy that. It's important for me, that standing up feature. If I am going to write, I like to be almost sitting, lay down, legs up, in a really comfortable position. That's what writing long or for a long time requires me to have as an environment. And the other thing that required for me as an environment is music. Again, if I'm going to be writing, I want music. I need to block myself out of that noise. And if I'm thinking, it can be a standing up or can be sitting down, but it also requires music. It just requires a different kind of music. If I'm writing, I tend to listen to rock in Spanish. And if I'm thinking, it tends to be classical music, because I don't want the words of the music distracting me in any way. So it needs to be classical or instrumental, where the brain can block the sounds surrounding me, but not get me distracted with what the song is telling or not telling.
It's interesting you mentioned how music fits into your productivity scheme, because I know a lot of people, that's the way they operate. It depends on what I'm trying to accomplish. I'll often turn on podcasts and just let podcasts through my headphones. Because listening to them, if anything of interest pops up, I can pause for a second and then go back to what I was doing and not lose that productive flow as per se, but something out of it. But if it's something that I really need to be, it's a creative endeavor. If I'm writing, if I'm doing a presentation, if I'm working on some graphic work, anything along that line, then yeah, I've got particular playlists that I'll pop into my headphones, and that there's no verbal in most instrumental. So I can truly just on the voice inside my head, talking to myself, getting things worked through so that I can keep my productivity flow at a maximum level. But that's taken a long time to refine. It's become very easy to get into things and get distracted because they're different. I've heard a couple of productivity experts who say that one of the best things to do is to pick a song and just put it on repeat, not multiple songs, just one, and just let it keep repeating and repeating, and it basically becomes white noise. Honestly, that would drive me bonkers after a little while, but to each their own.
If you give me only one song to repeat it, I think it will drive me nuts like you. I don't think it is a really particular style that I listen to. It is basically two different artists, but I think I need the variety of the different songs to be able to make it happen.
I'm like the opposite. I don't touch music at all. And it's not because I don't like music. I'm not much of a musical file, but it's just that it doesn't do much for me. If I have it, it's okay. If I don't have it, that's okay too. But I don't like fussing with the audio. I guess I don't like the shuffling of the songs and having to find the song or having to play the song or having to set it up or download it. I don't, for whatever reason, I don't like a whole lot of fussing around with MP3s and different kinds of music. But I do require a certain kind of, white noise isn't bad. I don't find that I have to use it a lot, mainly because of where I live. If you can listen in the background, you can actually hear a little bit of white noise because I have some birds. You might be able to hear them tweeting in the background. So they're sort of a nonstop tweeting sound in the background. And maybe that's enough of the white noise I actually need. I don't need any more than that. Just enough to sort of cover over other sounds like dogs barking and that kind of thing. But I find that it doesn't trouble me. What troubles me a lot is it'll be a phone ringing or a knock or a conversation that takes me out of the flow state. That kind of noise is the kind that I'm sort of working against. Even if I'm giving a speech, having a distracting noise that I need to account for in some way, like a whistle all of a sudden in the middle of my speech by someone in a different room, that I find distracting. So anything that doesn't sort of fall into the white noise kind of genre, I guess, or anything that jars me or requires some cognitive attention, that I don't want. I just want it to be really, I guess, simple, consistent, and the same. And I don't actually have to do anything about it. I guess I'm lazy that way.
It's an interesting spin on this because when we think about workspaces and the environments that we get caught up in, a lot of people in the corporate space have to work in open floor plan environments because they were so popular and still are to some degree. And being able to create a headspace in that environment can be even that much harder because you've got the visual distractions of people moving around you. You have audio distractions of people making noise around you. And in many places, like the client I'm working at now, they have created kind of isolation areas spread out all over the place that you can go and grab basically a one-person conference room to work in for a period of time. But yeah, the audio piece, I think, especially like in the open floor plan environments, you see more headphones than you see heads at times. It's just amazing how people have to do that isolation. And I always wondered what everybody was listening to. So it's interesting to hear this and hear how we each have our own best sound that works for us.
You know, as a person who used to fly a lot, I learned at that time that a lot of the frequent flyers put the headphones, not necessarily for the noise or for the sound or for the music, but as a clue of, please don't interrupt me. And my experience in open floor plans, especially when I go and visit customers, is exactly that. It tends to be more on the lines of getting the headphones so you don't get interrupted than getting the headphones because you are necessarily listening some kind of music. But since we are in this, and I think this is a good time to change to what we talk about environmental factors. You know, how about the ergonomics, the colors, you know, the collaborative versus those individual spaces, you know, the tools. How about clutter? How about clear spaces, distraction? And again, a stand-up desk. And as I said, I love my stand-up desk for certain work. You know, anything that involves interacting with other human beings, I think there is nothing better than standing up. Actually, if I do short meetings, I love them when people is willing to do standing up meetings because they seem to me much more focused than when you're comfortable sitting in the conference room.
I've experimented a little bit with stand-up meetings, and I found that they work awesomely. I rarely get to be able to be around a client long enough to suggest that method. And none of my clients use it on a regular basis. So it's not a part of their philosophy or anything, unfortunately. I would change that if I could. I don't have much control over it. But I much prefer. So I like to move around. I like to when I'm on the phone, I'm always walking with the phone. I'm sitting at my desk, but if I could walk around and be on our call, I would. I just don't have the tools to be able to do that with. So in terms of ergonomics, I prefer to stand. One of the best setups I ever had was to have two different kinds of chairs. If you guys remember those chairs that came out for a while, which you would kneel at to save the pressure on your back. So they would have this knee pad in front, and then you would get into it and basically kneel forward, and they had no backrest. So I had a chair like that, and I had a regular conference room chair, and I would switch between the two. And man, I thought that was the stuff, man. That was the best. I'm so sorry. I actually gave away that kneeling chair when I left the US and came to Jamaica, thinking that I wouldn't use it or didn't want it. That was a mistake. I should have kept that thing, because I miss it. I really miss the way I used to sit in it and being able to shift my body position between the two. I thought was really, really useful. But apart from that, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to ergonomics. It's not a good thing, because I actually have a repetitive stress injury from using the move around mouse. So I can't use a regular mouse for too long. I have to use a trackpad, because if my wrist starts moving around too much, it starts to hurt. So I have to use a trackpad, a trackball rather, the ball that you manipulate with your finger. So I should be paying more attention to it, but well, one of these things, I guess.
Yeah, I use standing desks fairly frequently. This particular client I'm at, they have in many places scrum areas for their teams to meet for stand-up sessions, about 10 to 15 minutes each. And those desks that they meet at are actually motorized, so they can change the height of the desk. Very nice, very expensive, but very nice. At home, I've used standing desks for doing presentations. Often my standing desks have been nothing more than a couple of cardboard boxes, my laptop sitting on top of them, whatever comes into play. As for chairs can be a big deal. I mean, we should never underestimate the value of a good chair. For instance, I've tried that. I remember trying that kind of kneeling chair that you're talking about back in the day, and I did it until I fell out of it. And at that point, I'm like, I need something a little different for me. I've got friends who use the exercise balls. Instead of sitting in a chair, they actually sit on the exercise ball. And that's their way of being able to keep some sort of core strength and mobility into it. But it really comes down to if your ergonomics are correct. And I am by no means an ergonomic expert. This is just a supposition. But if your ergonomics are correct, you should not notice them. If you are noticing that something's not right, there's pain or something, then there's clearly something not right. And that's going to take away from your productivity. So the point where your environment almost becomes invisible or neutral to your experience is a good starting place. It's a good target to go after. My challenge is always the amount of gear that I'm interacting with and the number of devices around, and just generalized clutter, keeping that under control. That almost becomes a job in and of itself.
It is in a certain way, it is a job in itself, and the line between all these things, all these quirk things are worth it, and they're a waste of time and a distraction and detrimental to your productivity is really thin. But for me, I begin with the stand-up desk because I was suffering from back pain, and the back pain was distracting me from being productive. And it's hard to focus and concentrate when you are in pain. The problem I had at the beginning was I was traveling so much that required me to really get creative when I wanted to set up a stand-up desk, because I may have been on an environment today and a different environment tomorrow. Today is a much, much simpler task. I mean, my home office has one, my office has one, and then I have, as I said, a tripod trick. So if I'm traveling by car, so I can just put that one in my car, and then I have a one everywhere. But let me bring the question of the clutter and the mess in the offices. And I have seen everything from the people who cannot sit in a desk if that desk is not pristine, to the people who, you almost need a map to find their desk. And on both cases, I have seen high levels of productivity. So did you guys have a difference for you guys, or any data that can, reassure the messy people that the messy desks are good, or anything on that topic?
I won't say I have any data other than anecdotal experience. And my wife had a word with me the other day about my messy desk, and what was strange to me was that I didn't think it was messy. It didn't live for me like it was not functioning. It feels functional. I have enough room around me. There's nothing in my environment that feels like it's a barrier to getting work done. So I suspect that what's going on there is that she is just she has a different level of sensitivity around the amount of clutter she can work with. So she looks at my clutter and says, I could never do that. I look at it and I think it's just fine. So I suspect that there's something going on in which the individual preference is more important than any kind of objective measure of how many objects there are in plain view. And I have not found any science on that with respect to individual preferences. But there are other studies that show that distracting devices like smartphones, that unless you put them in another room, then they are distracting. Even if you turn them off, just their mere presence causes a distraction. So there's a question there also of, well, what's in the environment? And if your phone is sitting beside your beside your laptop, the research says that your phone will distract you, even if it's off. So I think it's not just a matter of of how much stuff is in the environment. Obviously a smartphone is a way more powerful distractor than just a bunch of papers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And it's interesting because it compounds when you start to look at things like smart watches, which are moving the notifications closer to you, even if you put your device out of the way. You look at we're very interrupt-driven societies, and especially in the professional environments, everything's a response to a request. And being able to control that for periods of time and giving ourselves permission. I mean, when I talk about clutter, I have to mentally quantify it into physical clutter and digital clutter, because digital clutter can be just as distracting, if not more so, because you spend time looking at it, moving things around, moving this here, moving that there, but no real progress happens. So you have to say, how am I going to mitigate all of this and still continue to be productive? It's difficult, and we have to give ourselves permission to make time to handle that. If you think about if this were a manufacturing environment, there's time allocated to go through and clean up the workspace and make sure tools are put away in the right spots and make sure tools are cleaned and tuned and repaired. They dedicate time because they know the efficiency of the work that they're doing is dependent on that. And when you're an information worker, you have to give yourself permission to do the same things, to tune your tools, to clean your workspace, to make sure it is set up in the way that you can be most efficient and that other people can work with you.
And that it's an important thing to set, to work with you. And, as I said, I like my desk clean, and it's something that, it may not be the last thing I do before I leave, but it's the first thing I do before I can even work. I need to reorganize that desk so I can be effective and I can work on it. But that is what worked for me. And that is really important in any of these discussions. What worked for me may not ever work for Francis and ever work with Art, and vice versa. And it's important that you keep that uniqueness to your environment. And even if they look, as quirks, they are important if they allow you to get into the zone and allows you to be really productive.
I think there is another angle here. However, as you guys were talking, I was remembering there is some research around reminders. So if your desk is cluttered because it has reminders, I think that there's enough research to say that is ineffective if you're trying to use lots of physical reminders and they happen to be in your physical or on your physical workspace. I think the research would say that doesn't work if you have lots of them. One or two maybe, but above a certain number, the Zeigarnik effect, which is the pinging that your subconscious mind does of your conscious mind when you have an unfinished task, the Zeigarnik effect would become too loud or too strong and therefore interrupt your attention. So I think if in terms of, I think there's at least one clear finding from the research which says that the number of physical reminders you can use is limited. Even though a physical reminder may work really, really well, you're actually limited in the number that you can use effectively.
And that's really an interesting thing when you think about, and this is kind of getting off of the workspace, but if we think about every place being a workspace, the idea of being reminder driven, we look at tools, task managers and that sort, and that's a deciding factor for a lot of people, myself included. How good is this tool going to be to remind me of the things that I need to do? Well, if you follow the conversation that we've done so far, maybe we have to flip our analysis of that around and say, am I introducing a tool into my system that's going to create so much reminder clutter that it's going to actually pull my productivity down because it's just going to be pushing things into my way rather than allowing me to get a focused, continuous flow going? It's an interesting thought. I hadn't considered it from this perspective before. Maybe we're reminding ourselves too much about things that are too small, and we need to look at our systems and say, how do I balance this? I think about the people who use a calendar-based system. There's a limit to how many granular items you can put in a calendar-based system. And if you look at classic project management methodology, typically the smallest task you'll break out is maybe 2 days, maybe a day, maybe an hour. There's a point where it doesn't benefit you to get much smaller because there's too many prompts to get things done. So we're creating that digital clutter I talked about earlier with the intent of it trying to help us out. I guess we have to take a look at it a little bit more carefully and say, what's the downside of what we're about to implement for our overall productivity if it's helping to address one particular aspect of it?
I agree with that. That's a really good point. And the average person doesn't exercise a lot of control over their notification, their environment of notifications. Let's call it that. I did a little bit of research on this about a year ago. Thought I'd do a lot more, but sort of moved on to other things, unfortunately. But one thing I found is that I couldn't find an app, for example, for my Android phone that could control all of my notifications across all of my devices. So what I wanted was something that could control at least my laptop, my tablet, and my phone. And I wanted to basically turn them all off and then turn them on in a selected kind of way. So if, for example, the phone rang, if my cell phone rang, and I'd actually been having signal problems, so my phone has not been ringing, but I would want it to ring on my tablet, my laptop, and my phone. This is for a regular phone call. Because I'd want it to be, that's the highest kind of interruption that I could receive. And then if I dismissed it on one, I want to dismiss it on all. So consider that to be the most interruptive, or the notification that I would allow to interrupt me under most circumstances. But below the level of a phone call ring, there's all the others, some that exist, including the ones Art mentioned, like a task that's coming up, a calendar item, a reminder to send an email to someone, notification that an app has been updated. I have no idea why I keep getting those, but they'll keep showing up on my phone. a signal that my computer has too many programs open and it's affecting the CPU speed. Someone sending me a semi-urgent message that I need to attend to, maybe by text. I need to attend to it by the end of the day. So it's not immediately urgent like a phone call, but I need to get to it by a particular time. So it's safe to ignore for now, but I need to. See, in the past, what we had was an administrative assistant who could take care of all of these notifications. In other words, they could protect our environment and help us to be effective. And then they would filter all the interruptions and notifications and feed them to us, sort of act as a point of triage and bring them to our attention with the right level of timing and volume. And they did a really good job. They could keep us being extremely productive. However, most of us don't have that. Instead, we have this ugly mishmash of apps. And I think the ugly mishmash is way more of an environmental factor for me anyway than either clutter, physical clutter, or sound problems or problems with interrupting sounds. And I don't think there's any hope in sight. I don't see that anyone, and I keep monitoring sort of to see who's developing the latest apps on Product Hunt. I don't see anyone thinking in these terms. Say, how can we give someone complete control over all notifications, all platforms, all at the same time, synchronize them completely, and essentially mimic what a great administrative assistant used to do. I don't see anyone heading in that direction yet. Maybe you guys do. I'd love to hear.
No, I have to agree with you on that one. Looking at what Android's doing with Android O, they're improving the new notifications functions in there, but you're right, it doesn't change that flow funnel. I've actually fallen back on my smartwatch. I use a Samsung Gear Fit 2 as kind of the funnel, because what it allows me to do is to say what notifications will come to the Fit and what won't. So I can literally go through and say, look, I don't want any of these anymore. I don't want any of these anymore. But they stay on my phone so I can get to them later on when I need to. So I'm creating tiers of immediacy when it comes to the notifications. But are there too many? Absolutely. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't go into a system going, man, I wish I had seen that notification 3 days ago, but there's just so many, I missed it. So we have to kind of balance that piece of it. Is there anybody trying to unify it? Not that I've seen. Everybody thinks they have the best way to do it and the best way to handle it. I would love to see some systems, some of the automation systems, maybe like an IFTTT or something like that, start to handle that in a way to provide almost that digital virtual assistant. But I think we're still a ways off from that.
You know, I had an old Pebble that sadly the battery is almost dead, so it will be replaced on the fall with an Apple Watch. But when I had it, I was using a similar system to what Art is saying, except that it wasn't on my phone, it was on my iPad. So my iPad gets most of the notifications, and the phone, and I actually have two of them. So I have an iPad mini that gets most of the notifications. I have an iPad Pro who is really skimp in notifications because it's where I want to focus. I don't want to be distracted. And on my phone, in order to distract me on my phone, you almost need to earn that right. So I have most of the notifications on the phone deactivated. Even my default sound is no sound. It vibrates, but it do not give sound. And the reason is if I'm concentrated, the vibration doesn't break my concentration. So if you want to be on my phone and actually make noise, you need to earn that right. And you can lose it too, because that, it allows me to keep focused work for a much, much longer time.
When I was looking into this with a little bit of rigor a year ago, I wrote an article in which I advised the reader to turn off all the notifications apart from maybe their phone, and then do a combination of what you guys suggested, which is to turn them back on one by one. In other words, have them earn the right to to be a part of your ecosystem of notifications. And if you missed one and realized you couldn't do without it, okay, turn that one on. If one caused a problem because it was off, turn that one on. If there's a new app that could behave properly, you hope, try that one and see if it worked. But I felt like the advice I was giving was really crude. It was so basic. I'd never read it before like that, but it seems as if that was the only way to stay sane. That if I don't have some level of control over these apps and they don't properly earn the right, which includes giving me control over the notification to some degree, and also giving me transparency, because there's lots of times I download an app and all of a sudden it starts to misbehave. And I'm like, what the heck is this? What's going on? I had to scratch my figure out, and I have an ongoing problem, as I said, with my phone ringing. Somehow some app has grabbed a hold of my ringtone and turns it off every night. I cannot figure out which app it is or which feature. I've been looking. So they don't behave properly. So not only do they not earn the right, but they actually make things worse. And then you're not quite sure which one is it that's causing this problem. So as users, we're sort of way in the beginning phase of getting control over our environment with respect to these really important devices, I think.
It's interesting as we talk through this, and basically we're talking about things like digital bankruptcy, and when people are dealing with inbox zero, the same concepts come into play. But if you back it up a little bit, the same thing is applying on the physical space as it is the digital space, because there's a point when you have so much clutter, it's like, look, just all of it goes. Just put your arm on the desk, slide it across, clear the desk off, and then start picking up stuff off the floor and determine what has earned the right to go back on the desk. We're doing the same thing. We're just doing it in the digital space. And it's just giving ourselves that permission again to say, okay, there's nothing here that has any more importance than anything else at this point. You are all going to start from zero. And we are going to start going from that point forward and say, okay, Mr. Facebook notification, I don't need you all the time. I'm going to turn you off, and I'll check that occasionally. However, my Telegram notifications, I need those. So you're going to get a higher priority. It's important time spent. And unfortunately, we do have a tendency to deprioritize that effort in contrast to other work that, quote, has to be done. Well, if we don't take time to do the stuff to make ourselves more efficient, the other work is not going to happen at any better rate. So I think you guys are absolutely right as we look at this. Can we take the time? Can we set a time? Is this something do you think we should be doing this on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis? How frequently do you guys think we should kind of purge and reset our systems?
I think ultimately, hopefully at some point in our lifetime, someone will make it easy for us to do it. It's just that it's hard to do it today. It's just really time consuming and laborious and tedious and mysterious in bad ways. And I think there's an opportunity for someone to come up with a sort of a controller kind of software that makes it easy for us to do that. But I think it's initially there's an investment. Today, the investment is sort of, you've got to make it continuously, and you've got to invest a good amount of time to do it because it's all manual. But I think in the future, someone will find a way to help make it easier for us. And then the frequency will be an exception. I think it's an exception basis, that it's a sort of a set it and leave it kind of situation in the future. But today it's manual. And if you're not careful, in a week's time, you'll have some app just driving you crazy. Or like in my case, taking over important functions, and you can't even figure out where it's coming from. So, boy, we're in a bad spot here. Save us, Augusto.
I don't know if I'm going to save us, but I'd say that will depend on what we're talking. So if we go and keep talking about the workspace, I will say around once a year. I learned, years ago, I began reading my friend Michael Slinsky redoing his office once a year. And once a year, he basically got all his office out of the space and then think about everything that is going to come back. So in a way, anything that is going to come back into that environment need to earn that space into this environment. And when I begin reading that, I say, wow, that seems like a lot of work. So happened that on one of the years he did it, I had to move my home office. So I decided, instead of move as I have moved in the past, so AKA everything, and figure out how to fit it in there, I decided to use the opportunity to revise anything that was coming back and see if anything that was coming back had really a space, could earn a space, or need to get out of the space. And the experience was fantastic. I got rid of a bunch of junk out of my home office that it was there, some of a reminder, some because, hey, well, I had it in the past, and some that was simply using a space on the home office. So after that, I said, okay, this was a really useful exercise. And I created on my calendar an appointment for a year after. And I redid the exercise. And it was, again, fantastic. And since every time September hits around, I took everything down from network, cables, everything, and revise everything that comes into my physical home office, as well as my office my space in the office, or my office in the office. And it is a fantastic experience because you don't notice those little things you start putting on shelves, on the desk, on the corner, that really have no space there. And the only thing that produce is white noise or black noise, because it's not really a pleasant one. Regarding my digital life, so my iPhone and my tablets and the computer, I should do it more often, but I do it also once a year. And then I make a backup of the iPad. So if something happened, I can restore quickly, and then remove everything, restore, install a new OS, and then go one by one. Yes, it's time consuming, no question about it. But most of the time, I'm able to reduce the amount of junk that my devices have significantly. Because the reality is, it's so easy to install something these days. It's in many cases even so cheap that you say, okay, fine, I will pay and install it. And then you use it 2 times, never use it again. But it's there, it's using cycles, it's making noise, it's using space. And in a way, it's doing a negative effect instead of a positive one. So if you don't want to do the full cleaning and you don't want to start the device from scratch every time, the other thing you can do is that you can do easily on iOS as well as Android, is use different pages. So use a page for the applications that you use the most, and make the applications earn that position on that prime real estate of that first page, and then start moving things and hiding them to the point that then it's almost more work to find them that just don't use them. And you will then naturally go to the point, well, if this thing is already on the 3rd page, really, it can be deleted. I don't use it. Who knows when was the last time I used it? So those are the 2 things I do to clean my physical space and my digital one.
That process is a great way to handle it. I love doing that. I don't do it often enough on my phone because I have a tendency to accumulate apps on my phone, like many of us do. So I have to periodically go through and say, wait, what was that app again? And if I ask that question, I apparently have not used it recently and probably can take it off my phone. But if you look at a lot of the blogs, there's a great blog called Unclutterer that has these types of tips and tricks that can be adapted to apply to our own workspaces. And the only caution I provide is to watch the rabbit hole, because it could almost become detrimental to spend so much time trying to mentally and physically unclutter what we're doing to try and reach that mythical peak productivity environment. We still have to follow the classic 80-20 measure. Find the things that are going to make the biggest impact, implement those, and don't sweat the small stuff. Get back to work and get things done, and then work into smaller and smaller details as the bigger things have taken hold. But there is a point where you just need to stop trying to make it better and just get some work done.
I agree. And it's funny because we started off the conversation and sort of the outline of to the physical clutter, or at least non-digital. And we've sort of moved now to talking about digital clutter or digital environment. And I think that the focus on keeping your digital environment pristine or workable or productive is a brand new topic for us to be looking at in terms of this as human beings. Because before the digital age, there were no digital objects for us to have to worry about. But no, they become a huge part of our life. I wonder if we need a whole different show on just managing digital clutter, because there's seems to be a whole bunch of levels in terms of how we can even think about digital. It's not just about clutter. It's about digital processes, digital apps, digital data, resources that we need. We don't yet have a structured way to think about the digital objects in our life. And I'm thinking we need one badly.
Well, your wish may be granted, and we may have that show pretty soon. Any tip you can leave to our listeners? Any closing comments that you guys have?
I would reiterate what I mentioned before, which is just the idea of that we all actually repeat it in different ways, which is to turn off everything and then bring everything back in one by one until you feel comfortable. It's painful. I had to do it with my smartphone and my laptop in the last year, but the result, I'm so happy with the result. It just that before doing it, it just seemed like it was going to kill me. But after the fact, it's the best feeling in the world to have done it.
Yeah, for me, it's really just the reminder that the work you do to make yourself more efficient at the other work you do is just as important. So giving yourself that permission to take time to sharpen the saw, to use the old axiom, is something we have to want to be at our peak productivity.
For me, the reality is we also clutter at a faster speed than we used to. It used to be much more difficult to acquire goods, and it used to be much more difficult to acquire digital goods. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a movie, a PDF, a free report. It used to be a much more complex things to do. We take for granted the fact that I can go online, at least here in the States, go to Amazon now and get most of a lot of things in the 2 hours without even need to move out of my office. And the reality is that we are getting more and more clutter at a much faster speed that require that we also get better at processing that and to get rid of it. So it's where it comes important that you evaluate that environment, that you figure it out how to keep it in the pristine place and discover what you need to do to be able to have a really productive one. If not, hey, find a different one. You get a place where you receive when you work with the clutter, and then get a place where you can really be productive, if that's possible for you.
So did you just say that I can tell my wife that my cluttered office is Jeff Bezos's fault, not mine?
Hey, if your wife buy it, I think it's a good.
I just want to be clear. Just want to be clear that there is professional reinforcement of this particular mindset. So, okay, she's not going to buy it, but it's worth a shot.
Hey, but it's always worth a shot. Most of the things my wife doesn't buy either, but hey, it's always worth a shot. And with that, this is another episode of ProductivityCast, weekly show about all things productivity. Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.